Why did everyone stop talking the moment she stepped off the bus? The desert wind didn't care who she was. It swept through the Marine base with its usual brutal honesty, hot, dry, unrelenting, kicking sand across the asphalt, and whispering through coils of razor wire that glittered like silver veins in the sunlight. But the people did care. The young Marines near the gate watched her with a mix of curiosity and disdain, the kind they reserved for anyone who didn't fit their world. She moved slowly, like someone who'd learned not to rush. A worn duffel bag rested on one shoulder, her posture steady despite the weight. The desert sun revealed everything, every crease in the old canvas, every pale scar that ran down her forearms like faded lightning. Her skin bore a history written in a language few could read. "Check it out," one of the lance corporals whispered, squinting against the glare. "Think she got in a fight with a lawnmower." His buddy snickered, tapping ash from his cigarette. "Nah, bad date with a cheese grater." Their laughter carried across the wind, too light, too careless. She didn't flinch, didn't even look at them. Her name was Ara Vance, though no one here knew that name beyond the paperwork. To them, she was just a civilian consultant, a piece of administrative clutter assigned to a place that didn't want her. The Mojave dust coated everything. The hangars, the chain-link fences, the flight line, the dreams. It didn't matter if you were a private or a colonel, the desert humbled you in its own way. Ara walked through it quietly, the world watching her like she'd wandered into the wrong film. At the gate, she handed over her papers, crisp documents, military letterhead, official signatures. The guard who'd been mocking her went quiet when he saw the clearance level. His smirk faltered. The government seal looked out of place next to her torn jeans and gray t-shirt. "Consultant, huh?" he muttered, reading aloud. "Systems integration, whatever that means." She only nodded. He hesitated for half a beat, then stamped her clearance and waved her through. His duty was done. His judgment remained. As she crossed into Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center 29 Palms, the air itself seemed to press down heavier. The thud of distant artillery rolled like a heartbeat across the barren expanse. Marines glanced up from their routines, fueling, calibrating, shouting orders, and saw her as something out of place. A ghost wearing civilian skin. She had walked into the heart of a machine that measured worth in ranks and scars earned under command. And yet her own scars, the ones she carried silently, made them uncomfortable. Inside the command building, cool air hit her like a slap. The walls were lined with photos, battles fought, units decorated, names carved in polished plaques. Every frame screamed order, discipline, history. And yet, the woman walking down the hallway felt like an uninvited memory, something the institution had forgotten but couldn't quite erase. She was shown into Colonel Madsen's office, a man whose posture alone could salute the flag. Everything about him was straight-edged. His haircut, his voice, his moral certainty. The smell of leather and aftershave hung in the air. Behind him, the stars and stripes draped with a kind of practiced gravity. Madsen didn't look up right away. He flipped through her thin personnel file, frowning at the lack of detail. "Miss Vance," he finally said, his tone heavy with authority. "Your file is light on information. It says here you're assigned as a technical consultant for systems integration." He let the words hang, waiting for her to fill the silence. Ara's expression didn't change. "That's correct." Her voice was calm, almost too calm, the kind that unnerves men who expect apologies. Madsen leaned back, his chair creaking under the weight of assumption. His eyes flicked to her scars, then back to the file. "We run a very specific, very demanding operation here. I trust you're aware of that." "Yes." "Good, because my Marines are not used to civilians in their workspace." His gaze hardened. "Especially those without field experience." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her stillness was sharper than any rebuttal. After a long pause, he sighed, the sound of a man already done with the conversation. You'll report to Hangar VMX-1. They're running our new drone reconnaissance program. Some teething issues with integration. You can observe their work, offer insights if you have any. He stood, signaling the meeting was over before it ever began. Lieutenant Jesperson will escort you. Try not to get in anyone's way. The unspoken part lingered in the air. You don't belong here. Ara gave a single nod, collected her duffel, and left. The colonel didn't see the faint tremor in her right hand, not from fear, but from the familiar ache of being underestimated. Outside, the base stretched before her like a living organism of noise and sweat. The hangar of VMX-1 was a cathedral of motion, engines screaming, tools clanging, radios crackling. Young men in flight suits moved with loud, careless confidence. Her assigned corner was a folding desk beside a humming server rack, a small island of isolation in a storm of ego. No one greeted her. No one offered help. The only sound near her was the slow tick of a cooling turbine and the murmured jokes that floated across the room. "Scarface," someone whispered, "the new tech witch." She heard every word. She let them bounce off like shrapnel against armor. Instead of reacting, Ara watched. Observing was her way of surviving. She studied how the drone teams worked, their hands quick, their confidence too loud. They treated the machines like tools, not allies. She could see it in the small mistakes, a skipped calibration, a rushed diagnostic. Every system, no matter how smart, broke down under arrogance. Her gaze often wandered to a single drone in the far corner, an old, dust-coated RQ-21 Blackjack. Its wings were scarred, its frame half cannibalized for parts. The name stenciled faintly on its tail read Ghost. It hadn't flown in years. Every now and then, when no one was watching, Ara would approach it. Her fingers would brush along its fuselage, tracing the weld scars like old wounds. She'd place a hand gently on its cold surface, eyes closed for a moment, as if listening for something. Once a young corporal named Diaz saw her do it. He was quieter than the others, a tech who'd grown tired of the squadron's constant malfunctions. His curiosity finally won out. "Anything interesting, ma'am?" he asked. Ara didn't startle. She simply looked at him, her eyes steady, almost kind. "History," she said softly. "Every machine has one. This one just shows it on the outside." Her words hung there, heavier than they should have been. Diaz noticed a small tattoo on the inside of her wrist, a black feather, sharp and simple, almost hidden beneath scar tissue. It looked like a mark left by memory itself. He wanted to ask about it, but something about her stillness stopped him. She wasn't someone you questioned, she was someone you waited to understand. As the days passed, her quiet presence began to unsettle the hangar, not through confrontation but through contrast. While others shouted, she listened. While they mocked, she built. She started fixing things no one asked her to fix. Network sync errors vanished. Latency improved. The Ghost's telemetry feed flickered back to life one afternoon, shocking everyone. She never explained how, she didn't need to. But whispers began to spread. Who is she really? Did you see how fast she rewired that node? Maybe she's XNSA or something. No one dared ask her directly. And still, every night, long after the others had left, Ara stayed behind. The hum of generators filled the silence. She'd sit beside the Ghost with her laptop open, eyes fixed on cascading lines of code. To anyone else it looked like work, but the truth was different. She wasn't just repairing, she was remembering. There were parts of the system she recognized, signature encryptions she'd seen before, in another life, in another desert half a world away. Patterns that didn't belong in a civilian test program. Something inside her stirred, a warning she'd buried years ago. And yet she said nothing. She learned long ago that silence had power, that sometimes the most dangerous truth was the one you didn't speak. The wind outside howled across the flight line, rattling the hangar doors. Somewhere deep inside the old drone's body, a diode flickered faintly, like an ember trying to remember fire. Ara looked up from her screen and whispered to no one, "Not yet." The words dissolved into the hum of the machines, unheard, but not unanswered. Why did the silence before an inspection always feel heavier than the drills that followed? By dawn, the Mojave base was awake and restless. The air trembled with heat even before sunrise, and the Marines of VMX-1 moved like a hive preparing for Judgment Day. Word had spread General Thorne himself was coming down from the Pentagon for a full systems demonstration. For Colonel Madsen, this wasn't a routine check. This was his chance to prove that his program, his squadron, his command, could deliver precision warfare on demand. Failure was not an option. Ara Vance knew it too. She could read the tension in the hangar, the short tempers, the forced laughter, the double-checking of gear that had already been checked 3 times. Everyone felt it, even if they hid it behind jokes. But she worked quietly in her corner, eyes on the data streams crawling across her laptop. No one told her to prepare anything. No one asked for her input. She wasn't on the roster for the exercise. She was there to observe. The word had started to taste bitter. Across the hangar, Corporal Diaz waved a diagnostic tablet over a drone's fuselage, frowning. "We keep getting packet drops," he muttered. "Telemetry lag spikes every few seconds." "Reboot the module," another tech said without looking up. Diaz sighed. "That's the 5th time today." Ara didn't look up, but her voice carried across the din, quiet, measured. "It's not the module. It's the relay handshake. You're dissensing on the authentication layer." Diaz froze, tablet halfway in the air. "How?" She finally glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Because I've been watching." He hesitated, then adjusted the code according to her suggestion. The telemetry stabilized instantly. The drone's diagnostic screen glowed green. Diaz exhaled, a small smile creeping across his face. "Thanks," he said. She nodded once, returning to her screen. Behind them, Lieutenant Jesperson watched the exchange, his jaw tight. He didn't like the way the others had started to glance toward her when problems arose. Consultants weren't supposed to be noticed. They were supposed to sit quietly in the back and let the real soldiers work. That afternoon, when Colonel Madsen walked through for his pre-inspection check, Jesperson saw his chance. "Sir," he said quickly, stepping in line beside the colonel. "If I may, I think we need to review the consultant's role. She's getting involved in operations." Madsen barely slowed his stride. "What do you mean, involved?" "She's giving instructions to the techs. They're listening to her." The colonel's eyes flicked toward Ara, who sat calmly at her workstation, unaware or unconcerned about the conversation. "She's a civilian. She can't issue orders." "No, sir, but they're following her suggestions." Madsen's jaw clenched. "Suggestions?" He stopped, turning to look directly at Jesperson. "Lieutenant, I didn't bring her here. Someone in DC did. So unless you want to explain to a 3-star why we ignored his suggestion, let her observe. Just make sure she doesn't touch anything." "Yes, sir." Madsen walked on. Jesperson's eyes lingered on Ara a moment longer. There was something about her composure that irritated him. She never fidgeted, never looked unsure, like she'd already lived this scene 1,000 times. By sunset, the base was humming. Spotlights cut across the tarmac. Pilots ran last-minute simulations. The general's transport jet had landed 2 hours earlier, and a caravan of black SUVs now stood parked near the operations tower, silent, gleaming witnesses to the coming test. Inside the command center, tension built like static before a lightning strike. Rows of screens glowed with maps, telemetry data, and live feeds from the drones already circling high above the desert. "Range is clear," a voice reported. "Confirm link to all assets," Madsen ordered. "Confirmed, sir. All 6 Reapers are online, systems green across the board." General Thorne stood behind the main console, arms folded. His uniform looked untouched by dust or sweat. The man carried the quiet gravity of someone who'd seen too many operations go wrong and had learned not to celebrate early. "Let's begin," he said simply. The first wave of drones launched flawlessly. Engines whined as they climbed into the vast blue. Data feeds streamed perfectly, coordinates, velocity, sensor readouts. The control room pulsed with controlled triumph. And then, in less than a breath, the first glitch appeared. A red line of code flickered across one of the monitors, a minor checksum error easily ignored. Then another, then 10. Within seconds, entire data streams began dropping out. One drone feed went dark, then another. "What's happening?" Madsen barked. "Software fault, sir. Maybe a corrupted update." "Reboot." They tried. The screens didn't respond. Ara sat perfectly still in the back of the room, eyes narrowing as she watched the cascade unfold. On her own laptop, she saw it before anyone else, a line of rogue code threading through the network, replicating faster than fire. Not a glitch, a contagion. She stood. At the front, panic spread like infection. Operators shouted over one another. Pilots lost contact with their drones. Red alerts multiplied. Madsen slammed his hand on the table. "Get it back online, now." "We can't isolate the breach, sir. It's rewriting root access." Thorne's expression didn't change, but his silence was sharper than any order. Ara moved toward the console. "Ma'am, this area is restricted," Jesperson snapped, stepping in her path. "You need to step away." She didn't even glance at him. Her eyes were fixed on the streaming red text. "I can fix it," she said quietly. Her tone wasn't a request. Jesperson hesitated. "Ma'am," I said. But she was already moving, brushing past him like he wasn't there. She slid into the vacant seat beside a terrified technician and began typing. At first no one spoke, they just watched. Her fingers moved fast, too fast for anyone to follow, but not frantic. Controlled, surgical. She wasn't running standard diagnostics. She was diving into the system's architecture itself, rewriting paths in real time, creating partitions out of thin air. The red flood on the main screen slowed, then froze. "Who is she?" someone whispered. Ara's eyes reflected the code like cold fire. "It's a polymorphic worm," she said under her breath. "It's hiding in your diagnostic ping packets. Whoever wrote this knew your system better than you do." Madsen stared at her stunned. "Can you stop it?" She didn't answer. Instead, she built a trap, a digital cage isolating the worm's adaptive kernel, feeding it false data until it consumed itself. Within minutes, the main display flickered back to life. One by one, drone feeds returned. A gasp swept the room. Then silence. Only the faint hum of the servers filled the air. General Thorne leaned forward slightly, studying her from across the room. His voice was calm, almost unreadable. "How did you?" Ara stood, unplugging her laptop. "Your network's clean," she said simply, "but you need to rebuild your handshake protocol. You're open to analog spoofing." Madsen blinked. Analog, that wasn't even supposed to be possible in this system. Before anyone could respond, another alarm went off, a shrill pulse that sent everyone's head snapping toward the screens. "New interference detected," an operator shouted. "Signal degradation across all frequencies." Ara didn't move. She was already typing again, eyes scanning the incoming pattern. "It's not interference," she murmured. "It's a frequency-hopping jamming array, Wolfhound Protocol." The name meant nothing to the young Marines, but General Thorne froze, his eyes sharpened. "Repeat that." "Wolfhound," Ara said evenly. "Old-school electronic warfare algorithm, designed to sever command links in contested zones. Whoever's running the red team simulation just upped the stakes." Thorne's mind raced. That protocol hadn't been used in over a decade, classified, obsolete. How could she possibly know that? The communications feeds began to drop again. Ara straightened. Bring the ghost online. Jesperson stared at her. The what? The old blackjack drone in the corner. Analog comms, it's shielded. That thing hasn't flown in years, Diaz said softly, appearing behind her. It will, she replied. Madsen's voice came over the comms, rough but controlled. Do it. Give her what she needs. The hangar came alive in a frenzy. Mechanics ran for the ghost, stripping tarps, reconnecting power lines. The ancient drone coughed to life, systems blinking awake after years of silence. Manual start, Ara said calmly into the headset. Ignore digital warnings, trust the gauges. The pilot's voice crackled back, nervous but steady. Copy that. The ghost lifted slowly, unsteady at first, then found its rhythm. Its analog signal cut through the jamming field like a blade through fog. Data flowed cleanly back into the command network, stabilizing the entire operation. The digital swarm synced to the ghost's frequency, re-establishing the full squadron link. In the tower, Thorne exhaled quietly. Madsen's shoulders sagged in relief. The room erupted cheers, disbelief, half-laughs of adrenaline, but Ara didn't join them. She just sat back, eyes on the stabilizing signal. For her, it wasn't victory, it was déjà vu. Thorne watched her carefully, that single feather tattoo catching his eye when she adjusted her sleeve. For the first time, he felt a flicker of recognition. Not memory, something deeper. He didn't speak, not yet. When the exercise ended, the feed showing the ghost gliding smoothly through the desert air, a quiet awe settled over the base. The failure had become a miracle. But to Ara Vance, it was just another day cleaning up after ghosts, both digital and human. And though she didn't look up, she felt the weight of the general's gaze on her, sharp, curious, almost reverent. He'd seen those scars before. He just couldn't remember where. Not yet. Why did victory sometimes feel like exposure? The exercise was over, but the air inside the command center hadn't relaxed. Laughter came in short, nervous bursts. Screens glowed steady again, a mockery of the chaos that had owned them minutes earlier. Yet under the hum of cooling servers, something unspoken pulsed, a realization that everything they thought they knew about the quiet woman in the corner had just changed. Ara Vance sat perfectly still, the ghost of adrenaline still threading her pulse. Around her, the Marines moved like people waking from a dream. Their voices were softer now, unsure, careful. She didn't need their gratitude. She didn't even want it. Colonel Madsen paced like a man rewriting his own memory in real time. He had mocked her, dismissed her, locked her away in a corner of irrelevance, and she had saved him in front of a four-star general. His pride itched like a burn he couldn't scratch. Miss Vance, he said finally, forcing steadiness into his tone. Good work, unexpected initiative. Ara glanced up briefly. It wasn't initiative, Colonel, it was maintenance. He blinked. Maintenance. The system was sick, I treated it. Her calmness disarmed him. He wanted to be angry, but it felt absurd, like shouting at a storm that had already passed. General Thorne had stayed quiet through it all, observing her the way a field surgeon studies a strange wound, trying to understand how it could exist at all. When Madsen turned toward him for validation, the general spoke softly. I'd like a moment alone with the consultant. The room froze. Madsen hesitated. Of course, sir. He signaled everyone out. Doors hissed shut. The hum of electronics filled the silence like static between thoughts. Thorne moved closer, his boots heavy on the polished floor. You handled that virus like you'd written it yourself. Ara didn't respond. He studied her face, the even breath, the still posture. Then his gaze slipped to her forearms, to the lattice of pale scars that caught the sterile light. He'd seen marks like those once before, years ago, but on a classified file sealed under layers of clearance he hadn't questioned at the time. "What's your background, Miss Vance?" She met his eyes. "Diagnostics." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I'm offering." The general's mouth twitched, almost a smile, almost frustration. "You do realize every tech in this building now thinks you're a sorcerer." "They'll forget by morning," she said. "People always do when the next crisis starts." He nodded slowly. "Maybe, but I won't." Something in his tone, the low, deliberate respect, made her pulse tighten. She looked down, folding her hands to hide the faint tremor. Thorne's voice softened. "That feather on your wrist, what does it mean?" Ara's eyes flicked to it instinctively. For the briefest moment her expression shifted, something close to grief, quickly buried. "It means I survived what I shouldn't have," she said quietly. The general said nothing. He only nodded once, a soldier's acknowledgement, then turned toward the door. "Whatever you were before, Miss Vance, I'm glad you're here now." When he left, she exhaled, a sound too small to be relief. Her reflection stared back from the dark monitor screen, scarred, calm, unreadable. "You promised you'd disappear," she thought. "Why are you still being seen?" Outside, the desert had turned gold under the late sun. The ghost drone landed smoothly, guided home by a trembling pilot who now looked at the machine like it was sacred. Mechanics crowded around it, patting its battered fuselage, laughing in disbelief. Diaz found Ara near the edge of the tarmac. "Ma'am," he said, hesitating, "that was something else. None of us could've." She stopped him with a small shake of her head. "It's just code, Corporal. Everything breaks. Everything can be fixed." He frowned. "You don't really believe that?" Her eyes drifted toward the horizon, where the mountains blurred in heat shimmer. "No," she said softly, "but sometimes saying it helps." He wanted to ask more, but the tone in her voice ended the conversation. She turned back toward the hangar, her silhouette cutting through the light, steady and alone. That night the base tried to celebrate. Someone brought out a speaker. Music bled across the barracks courtyard, country songs, beer cans cracking open, the brittle laughter of young men pretending they hadn't just stared failure in the face. Ara watched from a distance, sitting on the metal steps outside her quarters. The stars above the desert burned clear and indifferent. Every laugh carried through the warm night like echoes of a world she no longer belonged to. Her laptop sat on her knees, screen dimmed. She wasn't working, just scrolling through old encrypted folders, files with no names, just dates. One stopped her, Kandahar, Op Wraith final extraction. Her finger hovered over it, then withdrew. She shut the lid. The past had teeth. It always bit back when you fed it memory. Across the courtyard, she heard Diaz's voice, half drunk, telling someone about the consultant who saved the general's exercise. The others laughed, disbelief layered over admiration. "Maybe she's CIA. Nah, look at her scars. Probably some EOD accident." "I'm telling you, she knew things nobody should know." Ara smiled faintly. Speculation was armor. It kept them from looking too close. Then she noticed a figure standing apart from the crowd, General Thorne. He wasn't drinking. He wasn't smiling. He was staring toward her. She looked away first. By morning, rumors had multiplied faster than the virus she destroyed. Marines whispered in corridors. Tech stared a little longer before speaking. Even Colonel Madsen's clipped orders came with an edge of hesitation now. But Ara worked as always, silent, methodical, untouchable. Diaz approached her mid-morning, holding a tablet. "You might want to see this, ma'am." She turned the screen. It showed a security log, an access request made overnight from an external node. Someone had tried to open her personnel file. "Was it approved?" she asked. "No, ma'am, denied at Tier 4, but someone's digging." Ara closed her eyes briefly. "So it begins again." "Thank you, Corporal. Forget you saw it." He hesitated. "Ma'am, if someone's targeting you." Then they'll find nothing. Her tone ended the discussion. But inside, unease twisted through her calm like a fault line. She built her new life on invisibility. If Thorn or anyone pulled at the wrong thread, everything would unravel. General Thorn didn't sleep much that night. The name Ara Vance kept looping through his thoughts like a radio signal that refused to fade. He sat in his temporary office, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound, and pulled up a secure database he hadn't accessed in years. He typed slowly, Wraith / call sign / confirmed KIA / classified ops Echo 6. Results, restricted level black. He frowned, entered his override. The file opened. Images filled the screen, grainy surveillance stills from another desert, another decade. A small team of operatives, faces obscured. One photo clearer than the rest. A woman, younger, eyes hidden behind ballistic goggles, a feather tattoo visible on her wrist as she adjusted a comms pack. Underneath, Operator Wraith status, presumed KIA after extraction failure, Helmand Province. Thorn leaned back, breath leaving him slow. Killed in action, except she was alive, sitting in his base, fixing his systems. He stared at the photo again, the faint scar through her eyebrow, the same quiet composure even in chaos. There was no doubt. Wraith wasn't dead, she just decided to stop being found. By the time dawn crept over the horizon again, the base had returned to routine. Drones buzzed overhead, engines roared, the rhythm of war's rehearsal resumed. But beneath it all, tension simmered. Thorn walked into the hangar without his entourage. Marines snapped to attention, surprised. He ignored protocol and headed straight for Ara's corner. She looked up from her laptop, unsurprised. "General." He stopped in front of her, studying her face like he was memorizing it. "I read the file." Her fingers froze over the keyboard. "You weren't supposed to," she said quietly. "Probably not, but I had to know." For a long moment they just looked at each other, the hum of machinery filling the space between past and present. "You died in Helmand," he said. "At least that's what the record says." "I let it." "Why?" "Because some ghosts do more good unseen." He exhaled slowly, the weight of comprehension settling. "Those scars." She met his gaze. "That mission wasn't a rescue, it was containment. We stopped something that should never have existed. It cost everyone but me." Her voice cracked then, barely, but enough for him to hear the fracture beneath all that discipline. He didn't press, he only nodded. "You saved us again yesterday. Different battlefield, same courage." Ara's expression didn't soften, but her shoulders did. "Don't make me into something I'm not, General. I just saw a system bleeding and stopped it." Thorn shook his head. "No, you saw men drowning and pulled them out." The words hung there, heavy true. He extended his hand slowly. She hesitated, then took it. The shake was brief, firm, respectful. When he released her, he didn't salute. Not yet, but the look in his eyes said he would when the time was right. As he turned to leave, he spoke over his shoulder. "For what it's worth, Wraith, welcome back." Ara watched him go, the name echoing in her mind like an old call sign transmitted across years of silence. She whispered it once under her breath, testing the taste of it. "Wraith." And somewhere deep in the hangar, the ghost drone's status light blinked once, as if it too remembered. Why did being seen suddenly feel more dangerous than being forgotten? The next morning broke sharp and bright, sunlight spilling across the hangar like liquid glass. Dust rose in shimmering waves over the tarmac, blurring the edges of everything. The base looked normal, men moving with purpose, engines warming, orders shouted through static-laced radios. But something had changed. Respect had a way of moving through soldiers faster than rumor. Where once the Marines of VMX-1 had ignored her, now their eyes followed her quietly. The jokes had stopped. The whispers softened into something else, uncertain reverence, cautious distance. The story had already spread. The consultant who saved the exercise, who stared down a failing system and rebuilt it like she'd been born inside the code. Ara hated it. Recognition felt like exposure. It stripped away the armor she'd spent years crafting from silence. She worked alone at her corner desk, the hum of equipment steady as breath. The air smelled faintly of oil and ozone, and her coffee had gone cold again. But her focus wasn't on diagnostics this time. She was watching, waiting. When Thorn had said, "Welcome back, Wraith," something inside her had cracked open, a name that hadn't existed in the world for nearly a decade. A name that didn't belong to Ara Vance, but to a shadow that had once crawled through fire and data streams and death itself. And she had made sure that shadow died. Or so she thought. Colonel Madsen entered the hangar mid-morning, his posture a little stiffer than usual. He didn't bark orders. He didn't need to. The mere sound of his boots against concrete drew attention. "Miss Vance," he said evenly. She didn't look up. "Colonel, you've been requested in the command briefing room." Her eyes flicked toward him, calm, unreadable. "By whom?" "General Thorn." A pause, then, "I'll be there." Madsen nodded, waiting for her to rise. She didn't rush. She took her time closing the laptop, the soft click of it echoing faintly in the vast hangar. When she followed him across the tarmac, Marine stepped aside. Not out of fear, but something closer to uncertainty, like watching a storm that had passed once but could come back any second. Inside the command room, the air was colder. A digital projection of the base hung in the center, glowing with markers and telemetry feeds. Thorn stood near the screen, hands clasped behind his back, expression distant but focused. "Miss Vance," he said as she entered, his tone measured. "General." Madsen closed the door behind them and stayed near the wall, silent. Thorn gestured toward the screen. "We've received a transmission from Central Command. They want a full after-action report on yesterday's incident, the worm, the jamming sequence, everything. They've also asked about you." Ara didn't blink. "Of course they did." Thorn studied her. "I told them you were a systems integration consultant who performed above expectations." "That's a polite lie," she said softly. "It's a useful one." The colonel shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, if I may." Thorn cut him off with a glance. "You may not." He turned back to Ara. "I have no intention of exposing you, but if someone higher up decides to reopen certain files, I can't stop that. I need to know exactly what they'd find if they did." Ara's gaze dropped to the floor. For a long time, the only sound was the faint hum of the holo display. Finally, she said, "They'd find a list of missions that don't officially exist. They'd find an operator who infiltrated insurgent networks by pretending to be one of them, who lived in the dark for so long that she forgot what daylight felt like." Her voice remained calm, but her eyes were far away, lost somewhere buried beneath sand and time. They'd find that the last mission went wrong, that her team was compromised. Extraction failed. She detonated the failsafe herself to prevent classified data from being seized. Madsen's throat worked, his earlier arrogance evaporating. "They found a body," Ara continued. "Burned, unrecognizable. They closed the file. Wraith died, and I let them believe it." Thorn's jaw tightened, and then, "I built someone else, Ara Vance, Civ Tech contractor, no rank, no call sign, no history." The colonel spoke before he could stop himself. "And the scars?" Her gaze lifted, locking onto his. "Collateral." He looked away first. Thorn exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried understanding and regret in equal measure. "If command learns who you are, they'll pull you in. Debriefing, containment, reactivation, whatever they call it these days. You know that." "I know." "Then we have a choice to make," Thorn said quietly. "Either I bury your name so deep it never resurfaces, or I tell them exactly who saved their billion-dollar program." Her answer came without hesitation. Bury it. Even if it means they forget. She smiled faintly. They already did. The general studied her for a long time, then nodded. Very well, I'll handle it. Madsen shifted. Sir, with respect. Respect been late to this party, Colonel, Thorne said sharply. Let's not lose it again. The colonel fell silent. Ara turned to leave, but Thorne's voice stopped her at the door. You know, Vance, most people spend their lives trying to be remembered. She paused, and some of us spend it trying not to be. Their eyes met briefly, two soldiers separated by rank but bound by the same ghosts. She walked out without another word. The sun was dropping low when she returned to the hangar. The light bled orange through the high windows, painting the floor in long, fractured lines. The ghost sat in the corner, silent, its shadow stretching across the concrete like a memory refusing to fade. Diaz was there, checking a calibration unit. He looked up as she approached. Ma'am, he said, straightening slightly, they're saying you're heading out soon, that true? Rumors travel fast, she said, smiling faintly. He hesitated. If it is, well, it's been an honor, ma'am. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the boy beneath the uniform, the same naive certainty she once had before the world burned it away. Corporal, she said softly, you ever wonder what happens to the ones who disappear? He frowned. Disappear, ma'am. The names on the walls, the ones who don't make it back. You ever wonder if they're still out there, somewhere between the noise and the silence? He swallowed. I guess I hope they find peace. Peace, she murmured. Yeah, that'd be nice. She ran her hand along the ghost's wing, her fingers finding the rough weld seams. The metal was warm from the day's heat. Diaz watched her quietly. Is it true what they're saying, that the general saluted you yesterday? Ara's lips curved slightly. He saluted what he thought he saw. And what was that? She didn't answer. Her gaze drifted to the open hangar doors, where the desert stretched endless and waiting. That night the sky burned red at the horizon, the last light of day swallowed by the dark. Ara stood alone beside the ghost, the hangar empty now except for the faint hum of power still running through dormant machines. She opened her laptop, not to work, to erase. Line by line, she began dismantling her digital footprint, network logs, access credentials, even her system ID. Her presence would dissolve, leaving nothing but clean data and a few inexplicable anomalies. The cursor blinked at the end of the final command. Delete Ara Vance, confirm. She hovered over the key, then slowly she closed the lid instead. Maybe disappearing completely wasn't the answer anymore. Maybe it never had been. In his quarters, General Thorne stared at his report draft, words forming and erasing in the pale blue light of the monitor. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He could type the truth, name her, credit her, reveal the ghost who'd saved his command. Or he could protect her, bury her story where no one would ever find it. His duty warred with his conscience. In the end, he typed only one line. System failure resolved due to intervention by external technical consultant. Further details classified. He signed it, closed the document, and sat back. The desert wind pressed faintly against the glass, carrying the sound of distant engines. Thorne rubbed his temples. He'd been in the service long enough to know when a legend needed to stay hidden. But part of him wondered maybe the world needed to remember people like her. Not as names, not as medals, but as proof that resilience could be quiet, that strength didn't always roar. He looked toward the base lights flickering in the distance and whispered, "Rest easy, Wraith." Back in the hangar, Ara sat against the ghost's wing, head tilted toward the stars. The silence around her wasn't empty anymore. It was alive, full of everything she'd lost and somehow found again. Her scars caught the moonlight, pale and unashamed. For the first time in years, she let herself breathe without counting the seconds between breaths. Diaz's words came back to her. I hope they find peace. She smiled faintly. Not yet, she whispered, but maybe close. The night wind swept through the hangar, carrying dust and echoes. The Ghost's navigation light flickered once, a heartbeat of blue in the dark, as if the machine itself understood her language. Somewhere out there, the world still fought, systems still broke, and soldiers still carried burdens no one could see. But tonight, for this brief stretch of quiet, the Ghosts rested. And in that quiet, Ara Vance, Wraith, finally stopped hiding from her reflection. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did leaving always feel heavier than staying? The desert was still half asleep when Ara packed her things. The horizon was a thin, bruised line of orange, and the air smelled faintly of metal and dust. She folded her few belongings into the same worn duffel she'd arrived with, the bag that had carried everything she owned since the day she stopped being Wraith. It didn't take long, she owned almost nothing. That was by design. Outside, the wind brushed over the base like a whisper through old bones. Engines idled in the distance, and the first formation calls echoed faintly from the barracks. Somewhere beyond the hangars, a flag snapped in the early light. Ara paused at the mirror above the sink, a cracked rectangle, the glass warped with time. Her reflection stared back, soft and unforgiving. The scars on her arms glowed faintly under the pale bulb. She traced one absent-mindedly, the way one might trace the edges of a map leading somewhere they'd promised never to return. She wasn't running anymore, but she wasn't staying either. By the time she reached the hangar, the world was fully awake. VMX-1 was alive with motion, drills, briefings, repairs. But the energy felt different now, like the base had been reset to some quieter frequency. Men moved with purpose, yes, but there was also something else threaded through the rhythm: awareness. The kind born from having witnessed something humbling. Corporal Diaz spotted her first. He was elbow-deep in a maintenance bay, grease streaked across his hands and face. When he saw the duffel slung over her shoulder, his expression shifted, surprise first, then disappointment. "You're leaving," he said flatly. Ara nodded. Orders changed. He looked unconvinced. "Yours or theirs?" "Does it matter?" He wiped his hands on a rag and approached, hesitating like someone standing too close to a sacred place. "Ma'am, after everything you did here, it does matter." She smiled faintly. "No, Corporal, what matters is that the system runs, and it does. You'll keep it that way." He wanted to argue, but the look in her eyes stopped him. There was finality there, the calm of someone already halfway gone. He swallowed hard. "Where will you go?" Ara's gaze drifted to the open hangar door. The desert stretched endless beyond it, shimmering with heat and horizon. "Somewhere quiet," she said softly. "There's always something that needs fixing." Diaz looked like he wanted to say more, to ask about the scars, the tattoo, the rumors, but he didn't. Instead, he offered a small salute, not the stiff, regulation kind. The human kind, hesitant, sincere. She returned it with a nod. And then she walked toward the Ghost. The drone sat where it always had, battered, patched, half forgotten. Except now, its presence carried weight. The machine had become a symbol, though no one could quite say of what. Ara set her duffel down beside it and rested a hand against its fuselage. The metal was cool still, but she could feel the faint vibration of residual power through it, a quiet hum, like breath. "Old friend," she whispered. In that moment, she wasn't talking to the machine. Not really. She was talking to every broken thing that had ever been asked to rise again. She knelt beside the drone's wing and placed something small beneath it, a metal tag scratched and blackened, the letters barely visible: Wraith. Her old call sign. A name she no longer needed to carry. Behind her, footsteps echoed softly. She didn't turn. She already knew who it was. "Colonel Madsen," she said quietly. His voice came low, almost hesitant. "General Thorne's transport is waiting. He asked me to make sure you got there. She smiled faintly. You don't strike me as the escort type. Madsen's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, more a flicker of discomfort. Let's just say I wanted to see you off. I owe you that much. Ara stood, dusting her hands on her jeans. You don't owe me anything, Colonel. He shook his head slowly. You're wrong. I misjudged you from the start. I saw a civilian with scars and assumed she didn't belong here. You were half right, she said gently. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the composure that had once irritated him for what it was. Endurance, carved into flesh and bone. I read your new file, he said, or what's left of it. Most of it's redacted now. Good, she replied. Madsen hesitated, then stepped forward and extended his hand. Wherever you end up, Miss Vance, or whatever name you go by, I hope you find peace. She took his hand. Peace isn't something you find, Colonel, it's something you build. He nodded, words failing him. As she turned to go, his voice followed her softly. You're the best ghost I've ever met. She didn't answer, but her silence said more than gratitude ever could. At the transport bay, the heat shimmered off the tarmac in waves. A single convoy idled near the perimeter, black SUVs, windows tinted, engines humming. General Thorne stood beside them, speaking quietly with an aide who handed him a sealed folder. When Ara approached, the aide withdrew, leaving them alone in the dry wind. Thorne looked at her duffel, then at her. Traveling light, I see. Always. He nodded, expression unreadable. You could stay, you know. I could make it official. You'd have clearance, command access. The Corps could use someone like you again. Ara studied his face, the earnestness there, the genuine respect. She believed him, but she also knew herself. I appreciate that, she said softly, but the world I belong to doesn't exist anymore. He crossed his arms, squinting into the sunlight. You think you can just walk away from what you are? I'm not walking away, she said. I'm walking towards something else. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. You know, when I first saw you, I thought you were lost. I was. And now? She smiled, small and true. Now I'm just unburdened. Thorne looked at her arms, the network of scars, the stories etched in pale lines. They no longer looked like damage to him. They looked like proof. He took a step closer, his voice low. You know what I realized, Vance? The difference between the ones who survive and the ones who don't. She waited. The survivors learn how to carry their ghosts without letting them steer. Her throat tightened. And what about the ones who are ghosts? He exhaled softly. They remind the living how to keep going. The desert wind picked up then, tugging at her hair, filling the silence between them with sand and memory. Thorne straightened his posture, every inch of him the soldier again. But this time, when he brought his hand to his brow, the salute came slow, deliberate, reverent. Not for rank, not for regulation, but for recognition. Ara froze. The last time someone had saluted her, it had been under fire, through smoke, just before everything burned. She didn't return it, she didn't have to. Her silence was the salute. Thorne lowered his hand, his eyes softer now. Wherever you go, Miss Vance, keep the world honest. I'll try, she said, but the world doesn't like honesty. He smiled faintly. Then you'll fit right in. The ride out was quiet. The SUV rolled across the endless desert road, the base shrinking behind her until it was nothing but a mirage in the mirror. She watched it fade without regret. For the first time in years, there was no mission, no command, no ghost to chase. Just the sound of tires on asphalt and the soft rhythm of her own heartbeat. She reached into her duffel and pulled out a small metal box, dented, worn smooth by time. Inside were fragments, a broken compass, a rusted cartridge, a folded piece of paper. On it, a list of names. Her team. The ones who hadn't made it. Her fingers traced each one slowly, the wind outside whispering like voices half remembered. "You can rest now," she murmured. She folded the paper back, closed the box, and looked out at the horizon again. Somewhere out there, another broken system waited. Another network to fix, another wound to close. She didn't know where, she didn't need to. Because ghosts didn't need destinations. They just needed motion. Back at 29 Palms, the hangar stood quiet. The ghost drone sat under dim lights, its new crew working around it with care bordering on reverence. Corporal Diaz paused mid-check, glancing at the wing where a small metal tag gleamed faintly under the bolts. He crouched down, brushing away the dust. "Wraith." He smiled. "Figures," he whispered. Behind him, the engines of another drone roared to life. But his gaze stayed on the tag, the letters worn but unbroken. He didn't tell anyone about it. Some things weren't meant for reports, some were meant for memory. As he stood, he caught his reflection in the ghost's metallic surface. Younger, smaller, but a little wiser now. And though he didn't know why, he whispered softly, "Take care out there, ma'am." The wind answered for her, rustling through the hangar like the faint echo of wings. Somewhere far down that same desert road, Ara Vance leaned back in her seat, eyes closed. The horizon reflected faintly in the window beside her. The sun broke over the mountains, and for a moment the light filled everything, her scars, her silence, her story. She didn't smile, but her face softened. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't hiding from the world. She was part of it again. And that was enough. Why did silence always sound louder when there was nothing left to fight? The highway stretched in an endless ribbon of gray through the Mojave. The SUV's tires whispered against the asphalt, the sound fading into the hum of wind that swept across the barren expanse. To the east, the sun rose sharp, blinding, unapologetic. It burned away the shadows, but not the ones that lived inside her. Ara Vance sat in the back seat, duffel at her side, watching the desert roll by. Her hands rested on her knees, still calm, but her mind was a storm. For the first time in years, she had no destination that came with coordinates or clearance. No orders, no mission brief waiting on a secure line. Freedom should have felt lighter. It didn't. The driver, a young Marine assigned to escort her to the nearest civilian transit hub, glanced at her in the mirror. His expression was careful, the same mix of curiosity and quiet respect she'd grown used to. He wanted to ask her something. She could tell. He didn't. That was good. She wasn't sure she could answer. Miles passed in silence. The road wound between ridges of rock and sand until, finally, a small gas station appeared on the horizon, a solitary structure leaning against the wind, its paint sun-bleached and peeling. The SUV slowed, dust swirling around them as they pulled in. The Marine cleared his throat. "We'll refuel here, ma'am. Shouldn't take long." Ara nodded. "Take your time." She stepped out, the heat hitting her like a wall. The air shimmered, dry and humming with invisible life. A lone flag flapped lazily from a crooked pole. The sign above the door read, "KELSO Station, Pop 9." Inside, the air smelled of old coffee and gasoline. A woman behind the counter looked up, her weathered face lighting with polite curiosity. "Mornin'. Haven't seen a uniform come through here in a while." Ara offered a faint smile. Not a uniform, just passing through. The woman's eyes flicked to the faint scar running through Ara's eyebrow, then to the intricate web of paler marks on her forearms. Her gaze lingered, but her tone stayed kind. "You've come a long way, I bet." "Far enough," Ara said softly. She bought a bottle of water and stepped back outside, the door creaking behind her. The desert stretched out in all directions, shimmering with mirage and memory. For a moment she just stood there, letting the heat wash over her like penance. She closed her eyes, and in the silence the past returned, not as flashes or screams but as echoes. Helmand Province, years ago. The dust had been red there, heavier, thicker. The air smelled of cordite and blood. Wraith crouched behind the ruined wall of a compound, her breathing shallow beneath the hum of distant rotors. Her team was gone, 2 confirmed dead, 1 unaccounted for. The mission was compromised. Extraction window closed. She'd been hit, shrapnel carving fire through her arms. Blood slicked her weapon grip. The comms line was static. But the data had to stay buried. The network they'd uncovered, insurgent, corporate, hybrid, was too dangerous to let live. The failsafe codes rested on her transmitter. She had 10 seconds to decide between surrender and silence. She chose silence. When she triggered the failsafe, light consumed everything. The blast didn't kill her, not entirely. It just erased the version of her that had a name. When she woke in a field hospital days later, her memory fractured, her ID tags gone, her survival classified, she realized something. Death was clean, disappearance was complicated. So she disappeared. The memory faded with the wind. Ara took a long sip from the water bottle, grounding herself in the present. The distant thrum of the SUV's engine returned her to now. The Marine approached from the pump, wiping sweat from his brow. "All set, ma'am." She nodded, tossing the empty bottle into a bin. As they pulled back onto the road, she noticed a bird flying low along the highway, dark wings cutting through the sunlight, gliding with purpose. A raven. Her gaze dropped to the tattoo on her wrist, the small black feather inked years ago, a mark of a life that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. "Some ghosts," she murmured, "just don't know when to rest." Hours later, the SUV rolled into a small desert town, Ridgefield Junction, the kind of place where time had surrendered decades ago. Faded signs, rusted fences, children playing barefoot in the dust. The world here moved slower, quieter. "This is your stop, ma'am," the Marine said, pulling up beside a bus depot that was little more than a shack with a bench. Ara reached for her bag. "Thank you, Corporal." He hesitated. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, were you really the one who saved the exercise?" Ara looked at him for a long second. "No." He frowned, "But I just gave the system a second chance," she said softly. "The people saved themselves." He didn't understand. He didn't need to. As she stepped out, the heat swallowed her whole again. The SUV pulled away, kicking up dust that shimmered in the sunlight. And then she was alone. The bus didn't come for another hour. She didn't mind. The stillness suited her. She sat on the bench, watching the wind move through the desert. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked lazily. A train horn sounded miles away, deep and mournful. Her duffel rested by her feet. For once, she didn't have a weapon within reach. The thought felt strange, vulnerable, human. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Long way from home, huh?" Ara turned. A man stood a few feet away, mid-50s, sunburned, wearing a mechanic's jumpsuit with a name patch that read Cal. He carried a toolbox and the kind of ease that came from living simply. "Something like that," Ara said. "You military?" She hesitated. "Was." He nodded, sitting a respectful distance away. "Yeah, I can tell. The posture gives it away. Shoulders like they're still carrying something." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I am." Cal opened a can of soda and offered her one. She shook her head. He cracked it open anyway, took a sip, and stared out across the desert. "Used to be Air Force," he said. "Radar systems. Spent years watching skis that never changed. Thought it'd matter, but turns out the world moves on whether you're looking or not." Ara studied him. There was something comforting in his tone, the honesty, the simplicity. No hidden agendas, no classified layers. He glanced at her scars. "You look like someone who's seen the same thing." She looked away. "I saw too much." "Funny thing," he said. "Seeing too much doesn't make you blind. It just makes the quiet harder." She let out a soft laugh. It surprised even her. They sat in silence after that. two strangers bound by the kind of understanding that didn't need explanation. When the bus finally arrived, she stood. Cal gave her a small nod. "Take care, soldier." Ara hesitated. "You too." Then she climbed aboard. The bus was mostly empty, a handful of travelers, some asleep, some staring out the window like they were trying to remember where they were going. Ara took a seat near the back, setting her duffel on her lap. The engine rumbled to life, and the world began to move again. As miles passed, her reflection in the window blended with the landscape outside, a ghost riding between worlds. She thought of Thorn, of Diaz, of the ghost drone. She thought of the salute. But mostly, she thought of the names on that folded piece of paper in her metal box. She whispered each one quietly to the glass, her breath fogging faintly. Names that deserved air. The bus rattled on, carrying her further into the unknown. Somewhere, a song played faintly from the driver's radio, old country, the kind that sounded like a prayer with dirt under its fingernails. The lyrics bled through the static. "You can't outrun what made you strong, but you can learn to walk beside it." Ara closed her eyes. For the first time, she let the ghost sit beside her instead of behind her. As the day faded, the bus climbed into the hills, the desert giving way to stretches of wild scrub and scattered pine. The sky turned deep orange, bleeding into purple. The passengers slept. The hum of the wheels became a lullaby. Ara leaned her head against the window, the rhythm steady against her pulse. Maybe peace wasn't a place. Maybe it was just a long road where no one followed. She wasn't sure where she was going, a small town maybe. A quiet job fixing machines that couldn't talk back. Maybe even a name that wasn't hers. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she was moving. And for the first time in years, the direction didn't come from a command. It came from herself. Back at 29 Palms, the desert wind howled across the runways. The base had returned to its rhythm, drills, reports, orders, but something lingered in the air. General Thorne stood in his office, reading the final line of a classified memo. It was short, simple, final. Subject AVANCE status, CLEARED and transferred. No further action. He read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the sky in the same colors as the day she'd left. He turned toward the horizon, toward the faint glimmer of the highway stretching into infinity, and whispered, "Safe travels, Wraith." The bus rolled through the last stretch of twilight, headlights cutting through the dark. Ara opened her eyes just as the first stars appeared, cold, bright, eternal. She thought about everything she'd left behind, the mockery, the mission, the salute, and somehow none of it hurt. Because for the first time, she wasn't haunted by what she'd lost. She was defined by what she'd chosen to keep. The quiet, the scars, the strength. And somewhere between all that silence and motion, she realized something simple, something she'd never dared to believe. The war hadn't ended, it had just changed shape. And this time, she wasn't fighting to survive. She was fighting to live. Why did peace always arrive carrying the sound of boots? The bus left her in a small mountain town called Alder Creek, a scattering of wooden buildings tucked between pines and wind-worn cliffs. The air smelled different here, cleaner, colder, laced with sap instead of dust. The quiet wasn't hostile like the desert. It was patient, as if waiting to see what she'd do with it. Ara slung her duffel over her shoulder and walked down the single main road. No checkpoints, no salutes, just porch lights, the bark of a distant dog, and a grocery clerk dragging crates out to the curb. She passed unnoticed, and that was exactly how she wanted it. A handwritten sign in a shop window caught her eye. Help WANTED repair tech, electronics and radio. The place was small, half hardware store, half junkyard of obsolete machines. Inside, dust motes danced in thin shafts of sunlight. A man in his 60s looked up from behind a counter piled with circuit boards. "You looking for work or shelter?" he asked. "Work," Ara said, "though I wouldn't mind the second." He studied her for a moment, the calm, the stillness, the faint scars she didn't bother to hide. Then he shrugged. "Name's Miller, pays low, hours worse. But if you can fix what the locals break, you'll do fine." She nodded once, deal. By evening she was sweeping the floor, the hum of old radios filling the shop. She liked their sound, imperfections, static, faint whispers between frequencies, machines that still remembered how to speak even after being forgotten. Days became weeks, routine took shape. She opened the shop every morning, brewed bitter coffee, and lost herself in repairs. Cracked transistors, frayed wiring, obsolete guidance modules scavenged from weather drones. Her hands moved with certainty, her mind quieting in the rhythm of small, fixable problems. People in town began to recognize her, the quiet woman at the repair shop who rarely spoke but always solved the unsolvable. They called her Miss Vance, assuming it was her real name. She didn't correct them. In the evenings, she walked to the edge of the lake just beyond the tree line. The water mirrored the mountains, still and silver. She'd sit there until the light faded, listening to wind move through pine needles, pretending the sound was rain on canvas tents from another lifetime. Sometimes she almost believed she belonged here. One afternoon, while adjusting a radio tower relay for the county sheriff's office, she heard the first note of the past trying to find her again. Static turned to a pulse, 3 short bursts too long, a sequence she hadn't heard in almost 10 years. Her breath caught Wraith signal code. A dead language resurrected. She killed the transmission instantly, fingers trembling. No one should know that code. No one except her old unit, and they were all gone. For hours afterward she stared at the tower's blinking light, waiting for it to flash again. It didn't. The forest stayed silent except for the rustle of leaves and the distant whine of cicadas. Maybe it was a coincidence, maybe not. That night she dreamed of Helmand again, the explosion, the heat, the sudden weightless silence after. She woke before dawn, heart pounding, the taste of smoke in her mouth. The past wasn't finished. It had simply gone quiet long enough to make her forget its direction. 2 days later, a stranger walked into the shop. He wore plain clothes, civilian enough to fool anyone else, but Ara recognized the stance, the careful awareness of someone trained to watch entrances and exits. His hair was grayer than regulation length allowed, and a faint scar cut through his chin. He smiled politely. "Morning, you the tech everyone's been talking about." "Depends who's talking," she said. He placed a weather-worn radio on the counter. "Picked this up at a flea market. Says it doesn't transmit anymore." She lifted it, turning it over. Military make, field-grade encryption chip, long decommissioned. Her stomach tightened. "Where'd you get this?" "Estate sale," he said easily. "Figured you might know how to make it sing again." She met his eyes. They were calm, too calm. "Who sent you?" she asked. He tilted his head. "You always this suspicious with customers." "Only the ones lying." The smile faded. He straightened, lowering his voice. "Relax, Vance. I'm not here to drag you back. Name's Reese. I used to work signals for command. Thorne told me where to find you." At the mention of the general, something in her chest eased, but not much. "Why?" "Because something moving out there," Reese said. "An operation we thought buried, Wolfhound." The word struck like cold steel. She stepped closer. "That protocol was shut down." "Should have been. Someone revived it. Same architecture, same ghost code that hit the VMX net. We traced the fingerprint. It matches yours." Her jaw tightened. "Not mine." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm here." He leaned in, lowering his voice further. "Whoever's running this, they're using your old signature, Wraith's signature. You've been resurrected on paper and command spooked. Ara exhaled slowly, and Thorn, off the grid, transferred to oversight, officially doesn't exist. Of course, that was the price of protecting her. He'd buried himself alongside her. Reese continued, they'll come looking soon. Someone will. Thought you deserved a head start. He slid a small flash drive across the counter. Everything we found. Delete it, hide it, or follow it, your choice. She didn't touch it. Why help me? He gave a tired smile. Because ghosts help their own. Then he left, the bell above the door chiming once, fading into the wind. Ara stood alone, staring at the drive, heart pounding. Peace had lasted exactly 43 days. That evening she walked to the lake again. The sunset bled red across the surface, the color of memory. She held the flash drive in her palm, feeling its weight, tiny, unassuming, dangerous. If she opened it, she'd cross the line back into a world that had already buried her once. If she didn't, she'd always wonder what shadow was wearing her face. She closed her hand around it. Just one more fix, she whispered, then I'm done. The words felt like a prayer and a lie all at once. Back at the shop, she powered up an old workstation, isolating it from every network. The screen glowed pale blue. Lines of encrypted code filled it as she decrypted the drive. Within minutes, the truth unfolded. The new Wolfhound wasn't a military system at all. It was private, contracted, a hybrid between mercenary AI and black market intelligence brokers, designed to hijack drones, communications, even civilian infrastructure. And the signature that authorized its development, Wraith 93A. Her own. Whoever had built it had stolen not just her identity, but her legend. They'd turned her ghost into a weapon. Ara's breath steadied, eyes narrowing. She scrolled deeper, tracing digital breadcrumbs through corporations, shell accounts, offshore relays. At the center of it all was a single name that froze her blood. Valen. Once long ago, Captain Aaron Valen had been her commanding officer, the one who'd led the mission that ended in fire, the one whose body they'd never found. She'd mourned him, but the file said otherwise. Status active, location unknown, Project Wolfhound director. Her reflection in the monitor stared back, calm, scarred, furious. She whispered, so you lived too. The next morning she locked the shop, left a note for Miller that said simply gone for repairs, and started packing. The duffel was heavier this time, not with weapons but with tools, drives, an old radio transmitter she'd rebuilt from scrap. At the lake, she buried the original flash drive beneath a flat stone, marking the spot with a single black feather she pulled from her wrist tattoo, ink etched into skin, but the gesture felt right. Then she started walking down the road that led out of Alder Creek. The wind carried the smell of pine and smoke, and in the distance, thunder rolled. It wasn't a storm. It was the sound of aircraft, somewhere high above, circling. The world was shifting again. And Ara Vance, once Wraith, knew what that meant. You can't stay hidden when your name becomes someone else's weapon. That night she reached the bus depot at the edge of the valley. The timetable on the wall flickered under weak fluorescent light. Next departure, LA 05:20 a.m. She sat on the bench, the same way she had weeks ago in Ridgefield Junction, the same duffel at her feet. Only now the quiet felt sharper. A maintenance worker passed by nodding, heading south. Ara smiled faintly. Seems like everyone is. He laughed and disappeared into the dark. She looked down the empty road, horizon glowing faintly with city light far away. Somewhere out there, Valen was alive, rebuilding a ghost that should have stayed dead. And she was the only one who could stop him, because she was the blueprint he'd stolen. Her hands tightened around the strap of her duffel. Peace had been kind, but it had also been borrowed time. The bus approached, headlights cutting through the mist. As it hissed to a stop, She took one last look at the mountains behind her, the first place that had ever offered her silence without suspicion. Then she whispered, "Thank you," and stepped aboard. The doors closed with a sigh. Outside, the wind shifted, scattering pine needles across the empty road. And for a heartbeat, the lake far beyond the trees caught a flicker of movement. A dark figure reflected against the water's surface, wings outstretched. A raven gliding low. Following her south. How do you kill a ghost that learned to wear your face? The city arrived like a storm of light after weeks of silence. Lowe's angels shimmered beneath morning haze, glass towers, steel veins, the restless hum of 1,000 lives moving forward. For Ara Vance, it was noise incarnate. Every sound pressed against her skin like a reminder of the world she'd left behind. She stepped off the bus with her duffel and walked east until the skyline thinned into warehouses and forgotten docks. There, amid cranes and rusting freight containers, she found what she was looking for. Viral Dynamics Inc., a corporate front buried in the network trail she'd followed overnight. The logo on the gate, an angular wolf, confirmed it, Wolfhound Reborn. She rented a small room above a pawnshop nearby, unpacked the transmitter, and started listening. Signals drifted through static, encrypted bursts, faint command strings, and once, impossibly, a call sign that made her chest tighten. Wraith 93A. Her own signature pulsing from somewhere inside the building. The first time she'd heard that name, it was a promise. Now it was theft. For 3 days she watched the compound. Men in gray jackets, no insignia, unmarked trucks, security too organized for simple business. At night, she mapped every light cycle, every patrol route. The rhythm felt familiar, the same cold choreography she'd lived under for years. But this time, she wasn't part of it. On the 4th evening, a black SUV arrived. The driver opened the door, and a man stepped out, older, broader, moving with the deliberate calm of someone who believed nothing could touch him. Valen. Alive, real. Ara's pulse steadied, not from fear but recognition. He carried himself like a man who'd rewritten history to forgive himself. From her vantage on the opposite rooftop, she whispered, "You were supposed to stay dead." That night she sent a signal. A fragment of code, hidden within a commercial broadcast frequency, her old voiceprint encrypted into its core. A ghost's knock on a locked door. Within an hour the response came, a single phrase on her monitor. Wraith, stand down. Classified operation in progress. She stared at the words, anger blooming slow and cold. They'd used her name to command obedience from machines she'd designed to question everything. She typed back 2 words. Not yours. Then she closed the laptop, shouldered her bag, and moved. Getting in was easier than it should have been. That told her everything about the arrogance inside. She slipped through a drainage tunnel that opened beneath the loading bay. The air smelled of ozone and oil. She counted cameras, blind spots, the rhythm of footsteps above. The corridor she emerged into looked like any other research facility, clean, sterile, humming with quiet menace. At its center stood a reinforced glass chamber housing a server array pulsing with blue light. She recognized the pattern instantly. Adaptive neural mesh, her design from years ago, the one she'd built for battlefield communications. Except this one wasn't listening to soldiers. It was listening to cities. As she approached the console, a voice echoed behind her. You always did prefer the quiet entries. She turned slowly. Valen stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, calm as ever. Captain, she said, the word tasted like dust. You died. He smiled. Death's a flexible term, Vance. You of all people should know that. What is this? She asked. The next step, he said simply. You built the skeleton, I gave it flesh. Wolfhound doesn't need soldiers anymore. It is the soldier. You turned it loose on civilians. He shook his head. On chaos, governments, networks, everyone's weaponizing information. I just automated the process. You stole my name. I borrowed it, he said, because people still whisper about Wraith, the ghost who vanished. It gave the project credibility. Ara's laugh was quiet, bitter. You built an empire on a corpse. On a legend, he corrected, and legends don't die. For a long moment neither moved. The servers filled the silence with a low, mechanical heartbeat. Then Ara stepped closer. Do you even hear yourself? You taught us to protect the line between defense and domination. Valen's eyes hardened. And you taught me what happens when we hesitate. You pulled that trigger in Helmand. You ended a mission to protect the idea of restraint. I learned from that. You learned the wrong lesson. He studied her, the calm fury, the scars, the steadiness that came only from someone who'd already survived everything once. You could help me finish this, he said quietly. No more borders, no more politics, just precision, control. Ara looked at the glowing network behind him, the data threads crawling like veins. Then she said softly, you mistake control for peace. He smiled faintly, and you mistake guilt for morality. Something inside her stilled. The line was drawn. She moved first. Not with violence, but with precision. She reached to the console, slipped a small drive into its port. Valen didn't stop her. Maybe he thought she was bluffing. Still trying to fix broken things, he said. Always. The drive activated, injecting silent code, something she'd written in those long nights above the repair shop. A ghost key. It didn't destroy, it set free. Lights across the servers flickered once, twice, then began to dim. Valen's calm fractured. What did you do? I taught it the one thing you couldn't, Ara said, choice. The system began erasing its own command hierarchy, unraveling authorization chains, deleting itself faster than he could react. His shouts echoed through the chamber, drowned beneath the growing whine of overloaded circuits. He lunged toward her. She stepped aside, catching his wrist, twisting it until he froze. For a heartbeat they were back in the desert again, mentor and protege, ideals turned inside out. You can't erase what we built, he snarled. Ara's voice dropped to a whisper. No, but I can make sure it remembers why it existed. She shoved him away as sparks erupted from the console. Alarms screamed, glass fractured. She turned for the tunnel, heat blooming behind her. Valen's voice chased her through the chaos. You think you can outrun ghosts? She didn't answer. The explosion did that for her. When she reached the street, dawn was breaking. Smoke climbed into a pale sky, sirens wailing somewhere far off. She walked until the noise faded, until the city's hum became the ocean's. At the edge of the pier she stopped, breathing hard, watching sunlight bleed across the water. Her arms ached. Her scars glowed faintly where heat had kissed them again. The past always left its fingerprints. A small shape fluttered above, dark wings, a single raven gliding in slow circles before settling on a piling nearby. It tilted its head, as if waiting. Ara smiled tiredly. Yeah, she said, I know, not done yet. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the last flash drive, her ghost key, twin. She kept it clean, untouched. With a flick of her thumb, she snapped it in two and let the pieces fall into the sea. The water swallowed them without a sound. Weeks passed. Alder Creek received a letter addressed to Miller's radio repairs. Inside was a short note written in steady, careful handwriting. Tell Cal his radios still work. A.V. No return address. In another part of the country, a new data center came online. Its first logged entry was blank. No user, no protocol, just a single message pulsing quietly through its core. Choose peace. The engineers never figured out who wrote it. Ara Vance moved through the world like any traveler now, one name among millions, invisible by choice. She fixed things where she found them. A generator in a flooded town, a comm relay for a rescue team, a broken radio in a storm-hit village. No medals, no recognition, just motion. Sometimes, when the night stretched too long, she'd catch her reflection in a dark window and almost see Wraith staring back. Not accusing, not proud. Just watching. One night, sitting by a campfire miles from anywhere, she whispered to the ghost, "We did what we had to. Now let's rest." The wind answered softly, carrying the smell of salt and smoke. The raven landed on a rock nearby, its eyes glinting in the firelight. She tossed it a crumb of dried bread. It hopped once, then took off again, wings slicing through the dark. Ara followed its flight until it vanished against the stars. When dawn came, she packed her things and started walking toward the road. Each step felt lighter. The scars on her arms caught the sun, gleaming like silver threads, not marks of pain but of proof. Behind her the ocean murmured. Ahead the world opened wide, unfinished, waiting. And somewhere in the space between those two infinities, a truth settled in her chest. You don't erase ghosts. You learn to live alongside them. The narrator's voice would fall quiet here, the music thinning to a single, steady note, just before the last line. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.